why the Oklahoma Sooners might just have the most complete football team going into the 2021 football season. If you look at the Oklahoma Sooners based off what they did last year in 2020, they had a rough start, losing a couple of games to Iowa State, I believe to Iowa State and Kansas State, and correct me if I'm wrong about that. But then after that, they went on a complete tear. Alex Grinch made the right adjustments on the defensive side of the ball, and we all know Lincoln Riley's offense. We all know how innovative, and we all know how these guys can put up 40 or 50 points on you on any given Saturday night or whatever day that they're playing. But Oklahoma, for the most part, dominated the rest of the Big 12. They ended up going right back to the Big 12 title to get the revenge against Iowa State. And then, of course, dismantling Florida, and of course, Dan Mullen giving the worst excuses possible to why the Florida Gators got their ass kicked in Louisiana. But going into this 2021 season, I made a preview video talking about the Oklahoma Sooners and their biggest strengths and weaknesses and stuff like that. But still, I do believe that Oklahoma is just they're not really given that much credit. I think a lot of people expect Oklahoma to finally get inside the college ball playoffs. I've seen some polls have them as the number one ranked team, but not really finishing them off. But Oklahoma they're very dangerous. They're very, very dangerous going into the 2021 season. And I do believe this could be a pretty good, or I should say, a complete football team. I mean, that's really the only word I can really describe, is that this team is possibly the most complete team in all of college football. And that even includes teams like like Alabama, Clemson, and Ohio State. So taking a look at Oklahoma and just their biggest strengths real quick, guys, just to kind of recap it, just like I did in my preview video, you look at the offensive side of the ball, the quarterback position with Spencer Rattler. You add Kennedy Brooks, who opted out because of COVID, but obviously, was a previous 1,000-yard runner before, of course, Stevenson took over the position and had a very, very successful campaign. But now you add Eric Gray, a transfer for Tennessee, a guy that's been, a 3 or 4 year starter at the University of Tennessee, very, very successful running back there. You now have one of the best kind of running back tandems, 1-2 punch combos in all of college football. The offensive line should be great. You do lose Ely, and you also lose, Creed Humphrey. You also lose Creed Humphrey at the center position. But Andrew Ryan, a guy that can step up there immediately and take over that center position. You still have Marquise Haynes there as well. You add in the transfer in Wanya Morris. So you lose about a couple starters, but you have 3 starters coming back, and then you add the addition of Wanya Morris. And again, you can plug Andrew Ryan at the center back position. You have one of the best offensive lines right there in all of college football. We all know they're good at the receiving back position. I love true freshman Mario Williams, who I don't hear that much about him, but Mario Williams, a guy that I watched a ton back when he was playing in high school from Plant. The dude is an absolute speedster. Guy could be the next Marquise Brown. So obviously we'll find out, if he can live up to those expectations. But you still have Mario Williams. You add him to the addition. Jaden Hazelwood is still there that you can work in the slot. Marvin Mims as your deep threat receiver might just be the best receiver in the Big 12, if not one of the top 5 best receivers in all of college football, of course. And then Theo Weiss, a guy that, had a little bit of work last year, but Theo Weiss is also a 5-star contributor. Spencer Rattler is going to be a quarterback, and even behind him, you have guys like Caleb Williams, who next year is probably going to be the next guy up. But Spencer Rattler is a guy that could end up being the best quarterback going into the 2022 NFL draft class. So offensively, we all know this team is for real. Pretty short and simple. We all know that's for real. You focus on the defensive side of the ball. This is where things get pretty interesting, because defensively, they have improved every single year. They have improved every single year on the defensive side of the ball. And I'm going to include this name because I know in my preview video talking about Oklahoma, I got a lot of criticism for it. Perron Renfrey is undoubtedly their most important player. A guy that can play as a 1 technique, as a 3 technique player, even as a 5. Perron Renfrey is a dominant player at the nose position. And then you pair him up with Thomas, Nick Bonito as your edge rusher coming on the outside. That is extremely dangerous. And then they also have some pretty good contributors at your Mike and Will inside linebacking positions there as well. So Oklahoma is stacked. Reggie Grimes also as well is a guy that I've heard a lot of good buzz about. Reggie Grimes, I think he played a little bit last year, so you now have to add him there. Asamoah is a guy that is expected to have a ton of expectations there as well at one of those outside linebacking positions. So Oklahoma is stacked in your front 7. I think maybe the only question mark I guess you can have is maybe their secondary, but even there, it's not that big of a deal, right? Oklahoma has never really had a dominant secondary, and I don't really expect them to have a dominant secondary now. Now, you do lose guys like Trey Norwood. You lose him to, you lost Trey Norwood, who was a pretty huge contributor for you. But, I like Washington a lot. You do have some other experience, I think, with Jaden Davis. There's some other names as well that are expected to kind of take up the mantles. But for the most part, I think the secondary has been fine. It has improved almost every single year since Alex Grinch has been there. And I think with the fact that the front seven has been very, very dominant, what they were last year, and the fact that, even though you're losing Ronnie Perkins, the Oklahoma front seven is still expected to be one of the more dominant, front seven in all of college football. Now, I made a video talking about why Alabama's secondary can kind of hold back Alabama. And maybe I should say the same thing for Oklahoma, because even though their secondary isn't the greatest, that isn't particularly a great thing, because you want a secondary to be as good as they possibly can be. And again, the secondary has not been the most dominant that we've seen recently. They are competing in the Big 12, which we all know is an offensive fire. It is firepower. It is firepower on the offensive side of the ball, and maybe that can help Oklahoma out, or maybe that can hurt them. We'll see if the secondary can again not be a particular weakness. I think that's the most important thing. Is it going to be a particular weakness? Is it going to be something that's going to hold back Oklahoma if they make it to the college ball playoffs or even compete for a national title? We'll see about that. But again, it's not the worst thing in the world, probably compared to some of the other type of secondaries that I've kind of implemented in previous videos. We're talking about previous powerhouses. Special teams with the Eric kid as well. I like him at kicker, all Big 12 kicker there. For the most part, Oklahoma, from their coaching staff with Lincoln Riley there and a lot of those guys, going down the line, including Alex Grinch on the defensive side of the ball. Again, the fact that Oklahoma was damn near a top 10 defense in almost every single statistical category, and a lot of people still believe that Oklahoma just doesn't have the defense. I think that's foolish. But for the most part, guys, I do believe that this Oklahoma team is probably the most complete team going in, because they have possibly the best offense. You have one of the best defenses statistically in all of college football returning back. I mean, Clemson is probably the only team statistically, if you want to just look at all the statistics and the players that are coming back. I think that's the only team that going into 2021 has a more complete roster, top from the bottom from Oklahoma. But overall wise, guys, Oklahoma, man, with the schedule that they have in the conference that they're playing in, there should not be any surprise at all if Oklahoma becomes one of the more dominant football teams in all of college football. And if they can get into the college football playoffs and they can finally get past that hump and get to that national title game, again, obviously Bama, they can still be there. Maybe it's Georgia, maybe LSU, maybe it's Ohio State, maybe it's Clemson, or maybe even one of the Pac-12 schools like maybe Oregon and USC can meet them there. But who's to stop Oklahoma for potentially claiming that title? I know when we're talking about some of the past schools, we kind of forget Oklahoma we kind of forget them in the equation. I think it's kind of time for us to include them for a potential national title for the 2021 football season.